Hello, welcome to another episode of the Edgy Futurist podcast. I always start it like that nowadays. I feel like I need a new intro. But anyway, you are very, very welcome. If you are listening again, if you're coming back for the millionth time, or you're coming in for the first time, thank you for joining us on a discussion about future education. Me and Mr. Hope are here as usual. This is episode 250 something, and we are joined in the studio by the lovely Shonogh Pilgrim. Shonogh will tell us a little bit about herself, I'm sure, in a moment. But thank you for joining us. It's been a while. We've been trying to make this happen as well, which is good. We've met just over 12 months ago, and obviously you were with us up in Leeds. Which was incredible. I know that'll come up in conversation today, but yeah, thank you for joining us on the podcast. And could you just tell people who you are and the kind of the work that you're doing?
I'm Shonogh Pilgrim, as you said. I'm the CEO of an organisation called Whole Education. It's really hard for me to say the name of our company because I'm from the Northeast, and if I said it the way I actually say it, which is Whole Education, everyone's like, what? Whole? So Whole Education is a not-for-profit, been in existence for coming up to 15 years, founded by Sir John Dunford and a group of other really impressive people, to be a group to bring together other organisations who believed in a holistic education for children. I've been told recently that we're a bit uncomfortable with the word holistic, but one of my things is that I kind of want to reclaim some of the words that we've become uncomfortable with. And we as an organisation, apparently, we're uncomfortable with the word holistic because it was too soft. And so I'm just going to put it out there that we're an organisation that believes in a holistic education, one that develops every part of a child. And over the years, we've kind of moved away, I guess, from our role as conveners of other organisations, have become much more interested in growing a network of schools, particularly to start with, but increasingly multi-academy trusts as well, who are committed to the principles of a whole education. And we define that as an education that develops the knowledge, skills and dispositions, all three in balance, that individuals need to thrive in life, learning and work. An education that gives people increased agency over their own learning and is interesting to them. I mean, who'd have thought? And also one which takes learning outside of the classroom and accepts that learning, actually doesn't just accept, believes that learning is about everything that happens to you in every interaction. And it happens locally and it happens globally increasingly. So that's basically what we are, a network trying to, I guess, campaign, although we've also as well always been really uncomfortable with that idea of being a movement. I think we are a movement, trying to ensure that schools, teachers, everyone involved in education is putting holistic education at the centre of what they do, and not just for our children, but for our adults as well, because you don't graduate, get to an age where all of a sudden you're developed. You know, a whole education, I think, is for, excuse the corniness, life, not just for childhood. So that's what we do.
It's an interesting one that the organisation struggles with holistic. But many people are pushing a knowledge-rich curriculum and focus don't shy away from that and don't think that that's just a really woolly term, because ultimately it should be the be-all and end-all. So why do you think that people often shy away from skills? We often have talked about soft skills, and maybe that was probably what people attributed for such a long period of time. Well, they're just skills, the skills that we actually think are really important. And then this holistic education in regards to the empathy, the understanding, connections, humour, passion, and all of the other stuff that we probably drive out of children in our current education system, especially in England, where we make them compliant vessels that only answer questions when you point at them or say they're allowed to speak. So why do you think is it that it's still seen as a lesser thing to talk about the holistic development, do you think?
I think that, from my point of view, there's a very fundamental bias in our society towards academic, to believing that academic is everything. And, you know, as you were talking there about the compliance thing, I remember my working class mum sort of raising me to be compliant. You know, her mantra to me as a kid was, work hard and do as you're told. And that will be the thing that will lead to you being successful. And I think, we're obsessed with academic. And it always, I find it hilarious because academic has a couple of different meanings. And one of them is pointless. Like you can say something is academic and it means that like it doesn't really matter. And so, I think there is a fundamental bias in our society towards people who are academically able, and skills and all of that is seen as kind of the domain of people who are not worth as much. The jobs don't earn as much. They're not desirable things to do. And I think, I'm being really audacious in saying that, but I think there is a fundamental unconscious bias that we're operating from, that there is a kind of worthiness to being bright and academic, and a kind of, and if you're not, then there's always skills. And it bothers me intensely. Quite frankly, it really pushes my buttons. But
and to be fair, it's an interesting thing, and I think me and you have had this conversation, or me and Steve have had this conversation, is that having been an academic subject, I don't even want to use that phrase. Like, you don't want to use that phrase because it's not a right phrase. But in a teacher in that space, and teaching A levels, and primarily teaching A levels, when students wanted to do, in fact, I don't know if you know, but in the vernacular of young people nowadays, the word BTEC is seen as, they would say, this is a BTEC version of a t-shirt, a BTEC version of a car, a BTEC version. Like, they use that, the kids use that phrase. So they acknowledge that, and that's horrendous. It's horrendous that they do that. It's like, like people use the word TMU version, or a Sheen version, of they do as well, don't they, of something. But in that space where I've been primarily teaching A levels, but we obviously had some BTEC provision there as head of sixth form, and then I think I've talked to this about when I moved into that apprenticeship role, and thought to myself, like, I had a huge lack of understanding and misunderstanding, and I think maybe malunderstanding, if I'm going to use all the different phrases, because I think I'd purposely thought that apprenticeships were for people who weren't academic. And then I met some people that were doing apprenticeships and realised I have absolutely got this wrong. And actually, to be doing apprenticeship is freaking hard. And there's no way that we should have that dealing, that separation, and suggest that they're better, or even that hierarchy, that the A-level university route is harder for cleverer people. Like, it's just, we need to smash that
I totally agree.
That paradigm.
And it exists everywhere. So I think, I'm really obsessed with the fact that our education system, for me, should be owned by society. Like, we pay for it through our taxes. It's not owned by the education system. It's there for everyone. And I've been thinking about, how do you get the kind of voices of people who are not engaged in education into the education system? But I think there's a problem with it. And that is that a lot of people think that the education they had was the best one. They don't know any other way to do it. And so, as a head teacher, and I was a head teacher for 8 years of a secondary school, I was constantly on this kind of journey of trying to help our parents to see that there was a different way, and that enabling their young people to become the people that they would be brilliant at being, rather than having this one size fits all, we've got to get across this bar and then they become worthy at that age. And then we've got to get across this bar and then they become worthy at this age and successful. And then if they go to university, I've kind of done my job because they're now educated. Actually thinking more about, what is your child like? What makes them come alive? What are the things that they're going to want to get out of bed for the rest of their lives and do that are going to make them happy? And in some respects, does it really matter if they don't earn as much as someone else, if they go into it with their eyes open and they make the choices for themselves? So I think a lot of the kind of issue is that everyone in society has this unconscious bias. Like, we don't even realise, I don't think, that we're operating from this assumption that, if we just pass the bar, then we'll be worthy in some way. I just think we need to kind of take that whole thing apart and actually have a conversation about what it is that we want to value as a society, and decide whether it is still this kind of first past the post sort of. There's a guy, Yong Zhao, who I love so much. I love his work so much. He talks about the ambitious pursuit of mediocrity. our education system being the ambitious pursuit of mediocrity, working really, really hard to make everyone average. I just think that is the best description for me of what we're about. We're killing people with workload. We're exhausting our kids and making them not really feel like themselves to make everyone average. Just madness.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things to pick up there. I think, as parents or as people that might not have children themselves, but will have nephews and nieces and cousins, and will have children in their lives at some point, I'm sure. Even if they're anti-children, and that's fine too. I've got friends, but they love to see our children and then give them back, is what they say, and everything else. But anybody involved or has young children in their life would kind of say that they don't want them to be rich. It's not something, if I said to you, Ben, what do you aspire your children to be or have? And you wouldn't say, well, I want them to be a millionaire. You'd say, I want them to be happy. I want them to be kind, and all those kind of things. But I think society looks at things. We look at them in terms of collections of certificates, in terms of collections of badges, in terms of things that you have in your possession. Things the size of a house, potentially. Not all society, but as a generalization. The type of car that you drive, how many cars that you've got, how many holidays do you go on, what you go there on holiday, why do you not go there on holiday? If you look at all of society, that is where it's evidenced in regards to the collection of things, and you need money to do that. So it's right that actually when you attribute, when we have those conversations, well, you need money to do that, and the best way to do that is to get a good job and to be academic, and those people who are academic are more likely to be managers and all those kind of things. That's what collection of society as a whole values. It's very difficult because how that's been there for a long period of time. That's probably well before A levels, and as Ben says, O levels for me. It wasn't O levels for me, by the way. I didn't do A level. I did BTECs. I did the wish version of A levels, which I think was what Ben was looking at, the wish version of A levels, and I loved it. And then I spent all of my career in FE supporting children through BTECs and different provisions. And the reason that we don't ask, I think, those let's classify all of children that are not in education, that could be in education in terms of what the norm says, as alternative provision, or the NEET children that used to be classified or anything else. Those millions or a million children that don't sit exams each year. And I would say we don't ask them the question because we're fearful of what they might say. I think, let's be honest, they will tell us the truth, and they'll tell us some real home truths about ourselves that we don't want to listen to because we're getting it right in terms of education, or that's what we perceive. So a couple of things to unpick there. I remember spending some time, I've done some work in alternate provision, I've delivered in alternate provision through my career in terms of FE, and some wonderful individuals. One of the guys, just to say that would classify, he was doing public services on a Friday, and I'm probably going to give it, so if he listens, he's probably going to go, oh, he was talking about me. So this lad was really, really, he was playing for the Rhinos. Really, really nice lad.
That's rugby league for those people who don't know. Leeds Rhinos, yeah.
Leeds Rhinos, yeah. So, and he was 4-16, so 14-16 delivery. I used to do all day delivery for public services. Those children that wanted to do a BTEC in public services rather than a different qualification at a school I used to go to school with. That's why I was so excited to be part of it. And he went on, did really, really well, got the best grades he could, but was just a really nice kid. And then fast forward, that person ended up teaching at the same organisation that I taught at, and he said, Steve, why? And he said to me, joking way, he said, why is it that you look the way that you do, and you must be really old by now, Steve? And I was like, cheers, mate, I really appreciate that for one. But I saw him at the park. He had 2 children quite recently. I'm left education. He's still in it. He's now a deputy head, doing really, really well. But I was like, how's things going, mate? And he went, you know what? I'm really, really happy. And I said, that day that I first met you as a 14-year-old, that's probably what I wanted. I was like, you're doing really, really well. People see it as success. You've got 2 children. But he's really, really happy. That kind of went all the way around. For all of those young people that, in terms of our education career, that we've worked with as well, it's great to see them come back and be happy. But why did we judge it based on the certificate and everything else? I don't know where I'm going with it. I've waffled for probably about 15 minutes now. But I just think that is society's issue, that we value things over experiences. We don't give our children experiences in education because we don't value it. We want them to get and make money so that they can buy things. It helps the economy apparently as well. So it's I don't know how we would fix that one. It's massive. If anybody has any thoughts on it.
I think the way we're definitely not going to fix it is just keeping doing what we're doing over and over again, even though everyone knows that it's not. Because I think everyone does know that it's not working. I think even, I work with a group of schools nationally. There's probably 50 secondary schools, about 70 primaries, and the multi-academy trusts. And one of the things I find most frustrating, not about our members, because they're all brilliant people, they're all just trying to do the best job they can. But the thing I find really frustrating when I sat with head teachers, as a head teacher myself was, we all know, we all talk about it. We all say, we're just so frustrated that we have to keep doing this. And I just kept thinking, well, then why are we? Why are we keeping on doing it? Because if anyone's got the power to say, actually, do you know what? No, we're not doing that anymore. It's the head teachers. And I know people who are watching or listening are going to be like, Sean, it's not that easy. As a head teacher, you can't say no. And I think you probably can't on your own. But if all head teachers said, you know what, we're just not buying this anymore, I just wonder what would happen. I don't think it would be sustainable to continue to push a way of doing things if people just got a little bit better at going, this is crazy. We know this doesn't work for the kids we work with. No, actually, we're not going to do it. The way we're going on, it's definitely not going to change. We're just going to, when I was still a head teacher, I was doing my MBA. So I did the first year of my MBA and then I decided to leave. So I didn't finish it. But I got my certificate. Listen to me, justifying myself. I got my certificate at distinction level for the first year. But the point I was going to make is I did a piece of research about an online school. So I was going to set up this online school as part of my MBA. And I looked at the statistics about what was going on in education. And what I found was that special educational needs, AP, and home education are blossoming. Like there are more kids trying to get into special schools, AP, in all sorts of different ways, and being home educated than ever before. And it just made me think, I wonder how long we're going to leave it before mainstream is empty. I wonder how long we're going to leave it until everyone is somewhere else because they've realised that what we're trying to do for the majority is not working for anyone, really.
It's very, very interesting. And it's an interesting question. How long will we leave it? And I suppose the urgency conversation is it depends really, and on what we really value as a society. Because I think what's very interesting in this space now is that the people who are making the decisions, most of them will not have a vested interest in the schooling system, i.e. the people that are sat in the ivory towers or the people that are in the Houses of Lords. They may have grandchildren that are in that space, but they aren't working in those places, and they have not got direct children in those places. Most of them, not all of them, but most of them. So their vested interest is less clear. Is the first thing. The second thing is that courage to go this far and no further. You shall not pass. The head teacher with the Gandalf stick, like just that level of bravery and courage. Obviously, we know that courage is calling, and we know that Ryan Halliday would absolutely tell us that we have to step into that. And there are some that are doing it. You know some of them. You talk about some of them. People like Dave Whitaker, people like Matt Jessup that we've talked about before. Others, and I'm just naming some that have come to the top of my head, that have gone, we're going to do something different. And interesting how many organisations are now looking to have that online school option, that additional extracurricular bit, or do an online course about X because they don't offer that in school. All them things that we're talking about, people are doing it, and companies and individuals are turning this into a profit conversation. And even I'm going to throw it out there. You're not saying this. I'm not aligning you to this, Shonogh, so you don't worry. Is even that other thing that got launched in COVID that obviously was a solution to everything that every school would ever need, which is still getting taxpayer money, even though it's a private business. Like that organisation, as an idea, was set up for a COVID conversation. But then, where's it going to go? And the courage to say, hold on a minute, like, we don't need to perpetuate what we've always done, but it is that change mechanism thing that we've talked about multiple times. That idea of, yes, people are dissatisfied with a status quo. Most people would tell you, most teachers would say, most students, parents would say, school is not where we want it to be. We're dissatisfied. But have we really got a vision of what it could look like? Have we got an idea about first concrete steps? Probably not. And therefore, the resistance to the change is going to be greater than all them other things on Danny Miller's formula for change. So therefore, change doesn't happen.
And also, we can't agree. As kind of progressive, if you want to call it that. Like, I wouldn't count myself as a progressive educator. I think I'm sort of middle ground, quite honestly. I don't really mind how people do education. I just would like them to think about it and make sure that it's for a whole person, rather than kind of just assuming that only one part of a person needs to be educated. But I don't really have any really strong feelings about how people do the education. In fact, actually, what I'd really like is for us to have more flexibility so that different types of education can be valued. As long as it's a holistic education, I don't actually mind. But I just think we've got to start somewhere with a conversation about it. And lots of organisations have tried, Big Change have done a big piece of work around the big education conversation. We did a piece of work with Brookings, trying to get parents and kids and adult and teachers to have a conversation about what they all value in education, regardless of the kind of education we're talking about. Actually trying to get some alignment and some, are we all on the same page here, or are different people thinking different things about what might be needed? But it just feels like it's huge. We're not agreeing. Those of us on the progressive side, if you want to put me there, are not agreeing. We're going, actually, yeah, but it's got to have this, or it's got to be flourishing, not thriving. I mean, even down to the words that we use. And it just feels like we need to get out of the way of ourselves, put our egos away a little bit, and get all of the people who believe in a more holistic education together and agreeing on some things. Because what happened on the other side, on the direct instruction, knowledge rich side, was they made it really simple. There was a really simple message about knowledge is everything, and you need to instruct people directly who are novices, and everyone got behind it. We are so much more open, because we are open for people to have different views, that there's not that rallying call, I guess, that existed on the other side. I hate this whole divide, by the way. Like, I think the actual battle is for the middle ground, if you want to call battle. The vast majority of well-meaning educators sit in the middle. They don't believe in the really progressive. They don't believe in this very rigid direct instruction model. They believe in something in the middle. And I think we need to reclaim that bit. We need to have the conversation in the middle, really, about principles, and then people be able to deliver in whatever way they see fit for their children and their schools, is where I am with it.
It's a really interesting thing, because the reason, like you said, it was so successful was because it was simple. But the alternative is very complex, and the success is the complexity of it. It's very hard to then narrow it down and identify it, because what you want is, and I've said it relates to the Tom Sheridan stuff, back to, and when I say Tom Sheridan stuff, the real small snippet of a book that I always go back to of, cultivating crop compared to rainforest of outstanding, wonderful nature just popping up everywhere. And I think what me and Ben have just been spending time over the last 2 weeks looking at community guidelines. I'm sure you've read it at the weekend, Shonogh. It goes out to 2,700 people. I'm sure you're one of those people, and everybody else out is there. But ultimately, what we then kind of went through is, if we're going to create this open community, this network of individuals that aren't shackled the way that the other structures are put into there, we need some beliefs and values led guidelines and structure to it, but it's a little bit like organizing the chaos is what we want to achieve. We want to just be able to kind of put not a rigid structure, but some scaffolding around it, so people are clear in regards to its intention, what it definitely isn't, and everything else that it isn't is what it is. And that could be, I think, by then saying really prescriptive in terms of this is what we want in terms of holistic education and the future of education, then becomes too prescribed, and you then remove the shackles out of exams and endpoint assessments and qualification and knowledge and put it into a shackling of something else. And I think, we don't want to take it from one box and put it in another. What we want is to really just create something that you say, you know what, come up with your own ideas, your own influence, your own thoughts as a collective, as an individual organisation. You have to these are the kind of beliefs and values that we lead in terms of this holistic and this new future of education. And it's more of, don't define exactly what it is. Let people define it with a slightly different mirror or lens based on their views of education. I think by doing that, it creates outstanding practice where if you went into however many members and multi-academy trusts that you have, or individual schools, that you would feel just a wonderful just warmth of, this feels amazing, and the young people are happy and the educators are happy and everything else. But you went into the one that's around the corner, you still get that warmth, you still get that excitement, but it's very, very different. Like, if you've ever been involved in going in coaching and looking and working with teachers for a long period of time that I was, and somebody said, tell me what outstanding looks like, and I was like, if you can tell me what outstanding looks like, then please, write it down and I'll go to that. I saw many outstanding deliveries, not in terms of like a box ticking thing, wonderful lessons and wonderful things that were happening across my career in further education and mentoring and coaching. But could I define out that? No, because everything was different based on subject, based on context, based on types of students and everything else. And I think that's the wonderful nature of what wonderful education looks like, that you can't necessarily define it. You just get that feeling. It's like walking through.
And I think some of the problem is that we try to define it all the time. So I think if you look at the word outstanding in itself, it means standing out. So outstanding means to stand out from the rest, and the very nature of outstanding in our system is the exact opposite of that. It's becoming like everyone else in that mediocrity thing again, isn't it? The kind of, to be outstanding, you've got to hit these criteria. To be outstanding, to stand out, you very rarely would be meeting criteria, because if you were meeting criteria, you wouldn't be standing out. So the word itself is used in a really ridiculous way. But, I totally agree with you. An education system I would hope for would be one where the principles are clear. So we as a society have agreed what we want our members to be like as educated people. And the delivery mechanism, the way that it happens everywhere and for every individual is different. And that's where I think tech becomes really interesting. The thing that makes me saddest, and I will align myself to what you said, Ben, about the Orc Academy stuff, it just makes me really sad, because it's taking what we do in the classroom and putting it online. It's not using the opportunities that tech might present to do something different that moves us forward as a society. It's just perpetuating the same thing. And the big thing that got me excited about tech, and I am the least tech savvy person in the world. Like, it took me ages even to connect my headphones this morning. I never wear my headphones because it made my head feel weird. But the thing that interests me about it is how it enables personalisable education, how it enables an individual to make choices about the education that they want for themselves. And again, without sounding like a fangirl of Young Zhao, and I am actually, he talks about the difference between personalised education and personalisable. And I think the distinction between those two words is really important. Personalised education is where I, as an expert, decide what you want, and I change what the norm is to meet your needs. Personalisable is where I, as an individual, work out what I need with you, and I make the change for myself. And I think EdTech has got the potential to take what we have, which is really a homogenous approach to education where everyone gets the same thing. And if you kind of sit in the middle, it probably works for you. I'm not entirely sure that's true anymore, actually, but that's the rhetoric. And it takes it from that and it allows us to have an education system that is truly personalisable. So we're actually working with our individuals to help them to understand what they need. And that's the journey, rather than us working out what they need and holding them in that space of being led for the whole time. That, for me, is the transition that I would like to see, that we work out what we want as a society and then we make it happen using tech and every other strategy we have available to us to make it personal for the individual. Yeah, when you sent the list of what we might talk about through, you had something about my education philosophy, and I went back to a piece of work I did before 2006. I can't remember when it was exactly, but the school I was working in, we did a piece of work on our core values as individual teachers, and I wrote them down in 2006, and I went back and looked at them, and one of them was that I believed in the fundamental need to see every learner as an individual and every child having the right to have an access to a great education that helped them to develop as a whole person and equip them for life in a successful community or as part of a successful community. I wrote it back in 2006 as my kind of driving principles. That's what I think we need still as an education for our society.
That's
I'm talking too much. Just tell me to shut up.
You're not talking too much. This is why we bring people like you on, because that level of wisdom there, that the fact that even 18 years ago to be thinking that's what really matters as a value does land. And it's really interesting. I'm just about to finish a book that you recommended to me, and my next book recommendation is The End of Average, which is also from Shonogh, and I think the one that's going to come after that is Focused by the man that you mentioned more than once already. So like I'm in that place where I'm reading the book that I'm referring to is a book called Collective Illusions. If anybody's not read Collective Illusions by Todd Rose, I would absolutely recommend that you do. And I'm actually going to be writing about it in an upcoming newsletter as well, because it's just the way that we've realised that we have illusions in a society. And I think this frames what we've been talking about today, which is we've agreed and believed that this is what other people want. So therefore we've kept our mouth shut and we've gone along with the collective, the majority. And actually, when you go down into the majority, you realise most of these people don't actually believe that anyway. It's just a really powerful book that helps frame the idea that we are led to believe this is what society thinks, or this is what that group thinks. And because of that, we stay quiet about what we think, and therefore it just perpetuates. It feels like this is education in that sense is ruled by a set of collective illusions, right?
Totally. That's exactly how I see it. And, I look back at that piece of work I was just describing to you that was done way back in 2006 by a head teacher who wanted us to do some work on vision as a group of staff, but she wanted the whole school to be involved in that visioning work. And I would say that it was the biggest gift I was ever given in my career. The ability or the opportunity to sit and think about what I believed as an educator myself. And I just wonder how many other educators have ever had the opportunity or taken the time to just sit and think, actually, what would I be willing to go to the wall for? Where is my line, actually? Because I know that all the way through my career since that point, I have been able to stand up perhaps to some of the collective illusions because I've understood what it is inside of me that I believe so fundamentally. And, I'll sometimes be having a conversation with someone and they'll say something and I'll be like, oh, I don't like that. And it'll be a really sort of quite violent reaction of like, no. And every time I unpick it, it always comes back to one of my 5 things that I wrote down all of those years ago. And so I just wonder if one of the places to start might be to get every educator even to think about what is it that I believe are the fundamental tenets of an education system that I would want to work in. I've got 5. I've never changed them. I've used them on every single application for every job that I've applied for in education. They are my guiding principles. They make my job easier to do. I still use them. I just wonder if that might be a start point, that we start to then break that collective illusion, because I think that is going to have to happen. We're going to have people who are willing to go, what if that wasn't true? And be willing to say that out loud. Because, I mean, Todd's book is just so powerful in showing you, like, you can feel it, can't you? When you read it, you're like, oh my God, I've sat in that room. I've sat in that room where everyone's going, yeah. And then you go, actually, I'm not sure I agree with that. And they go, thank God for that.
And the spiral of silence, just that whole concept that we have silence implies complicity, or like that whole idea that just because nobody's saying anything, and the longer that silence lasts, the harder it is to speak out. Even it's and then there's some brave people that go this far and no further. You shall not pass.
And I think that's easier though if you know what you stand for. And I just think we've got a group of educators, and it's getting worse actually because of the way we're educating our educators. You know, if you look at the MPQs and all of those things, they're very much this is how you do it methodology, rather than this is how you think about how you do it. And so it's getting harder and harder and harder for people to stand against some of this, because they don't actually ever get the chance to think about what it is that they believe and to sort of tie it down almost. Like, I think there is something about writing it down, about committing it to paper, about saying it out loud, that makes it more real than just having the sort of butterflies flying around in your head of what you're uncomfortable with or unhappy with. So I think there is something about the way we're educating our teachers as well that is just perpetuating this issue. I mean, you came to our conference, you heard Keith Grint talk about, very fast about all of the things that he is working on. And, you know, I really love his work as well, because he talks a lot about compliance being the issue and us not really identifying problems and categorizing problems effectively. And so assuming that there are tame solutions to problems, when actually what we're talking about are wicked problems that have no solution. We're educating our educators not to think. We're educating them to have an if-then methodology, where if this happens, you do this. Rather than, if this happens, there are all of these different things you might do, depending on the context, the child, what you're trying to help them to do. And for me, I just think we've got to do something about getting our educators to connect again with what they believe about education in the first instance. And these are probably things that are within our control, rather than the bigger things. Like, we as school leaders and as people who work in schools could make that commitment to ourselves and say, do you know what, I am going to pin down what it is I stand for. And where I have a choice, where I'm standing at a crossroads, I'm going to try and do the thing that is the right thing. Sometimes I won't be able to, but I'm going to try each time to do that. And then also just create a little bit of space for everyone to think. Just push the boundaries back a little bit within the classroom, within the leadership role you have. And just allow yourself to slow down and just go, do you know what? What do I think about this? How does this fit with what I believe about the world? Rather than just constantly assuming that the answer exists somewhere and I just need to apply the answer. And I think that's happening all the way through, but it's going to get worse and worse and worse if we don't change the way we educate our young teachers, in my view.
Yeah, and that's now been brought under central control. Control, I think, was probably a mantra that's been covered for a long period of time. But ultimately, I've used this example for a long period of time where I took my little girl into school, and the teacher was giving me some feedback, and and my little girl is absolutely fantastic. She's wonderful. She's been challenging this weekend, but they said she asks a lot of questions, doesn't she? And I was like, she does. And they were like, and I was like, and I was like, if the next kind of thought is, could we maybe get her to ask less questions? Then absolutely not. As much as it's challenging, as much as she's stomping her feet this weekend and doing all of those wonderful things, I don't want that to be taken out of Ella and any other young person, because ultimately we are creating compliance. And I was like, she's not even, she goes into reception in September. She's in nursery at the minute. I was like, so I think it's been compliance and just getting on has been there for such a long period of time. I didn't comply when in my education, and I spent a lot of time out of it. And I've talked about this. I loved art. My mum did art. There was a bit of a competition in the house. So I have two older brothers. They both got a D in art, and I was like, I'm going to try and get a C, little me, and I was the one who ended up getting a C. But for my whole art career and my whole education in art while I was at school, because I chatted a lot and potentially I was challenging, and I get that. Maybe I should have been a little bit quieter at times. So I'm not saying I was an absolute angel, but I had to spend my art lessons in, especially for the last 2 years, in the dark room. I think I've shared this, where they had a photography thing that we never actually got to use, and that was probably for the year level kids. That would never ever get to anywhere, and I had to sit in on my own in isolation in the art room. Couldn't speak to anybody else, and was kept from that thing. I ended up getting a C, so maybe that worked. But they took away from me one of my favourite things about school, which was social, which was connecting, and literally that was probably my experience in the majority of my lessons. The isolation booth was something I saw on a regular basis, where I was just told to shut up and just do the lines. And I think it's just one of those things, isn't it? I know we've talked about Dave Whitaker and the great stuff that Wellspring Academy does in terms of Joe and going to Paul Dix and seeing Joe that actually, I'm not saying bad behaviour, but actually seeing children as this holistic child, and then trying to understand why behaviours are happening rather than that behaviour equals bad in whatever guise you do. This is your outcome, and this is what happens to you. And I think that whole approach of trying to think of the strapline for Wellspring. I was a chair of governor there for a long period of time. So, why can I not remember it? But that whole approach of that understanding of why behaviour happens, rather than trying to pin it and trying to then discipline it out, is something that really,
Totally.
Positive
It's
regard.
that whole
Positive regard.
It's
Positive
the Carl
regard.
Rogers unconditional positive regard that, and I mean, my degree is in psychology. That's where I started, I guess. And the obsession with people, it makes sense of me. If you know that I believe people are amazing, and I believe every person has a unique seed of brilliance, and your talking and the way that you are in your behavior are part of that. And for me, like Dave Whitaker, you're enough how you are. I think that's how we should be coming to our education system, that every single individual is enough how they are, but we can help them to become even better at being themselves. And for me, as a head teacher, that was always the way I talked about our kids. Like, you're enough as you are, but let's work with you to get you to be brilliantly you. I don't want you all to become the same as each other. In fact, I would see our school as having failed if everyone became the same as everyone else. It's about helping people to find who they are. And, I think there's something as well about, like, we're all fascinated by who we are. Every single individual is interested in, like, why do I do that like that? Why am I like that? How can we help our kids to really understand the center of who they are, and to see that as something that is worth something, regardless of what happens to them? I think should be part of our education system too. Let's explore what you are, because I think that's what helps you be safe as well. If you can see that you are worth something, regardless of what happens to you, you're able to make choices as well, aren't you? So if you can see that, I talk too much. Like, for me, I am a wonderer. I can spend the whole of my life just wondering about how things might happen. I'll be sitting at my desk. I can waste hours, people would say, just wondering. But my superpower is wondering. The reason I come up with all sorts of amazing ideas, apparently, is because I wonder all the time. I'm constantly colliding different ideas, reading, thinking. That should be something that is seen as worthwhile in me, not something that is a problem. In the same way as someone who is really gregarious and outgoing and connects people, that's something that is really beautiful about them and should be valued and not crushed, in my view. So, but I don't think the way we do our education system allows that to happen, because we've got to have 30 kids in the same classroom and everyone's got to get along at the same time, with the teacher orchestrating at the front. And I've done it. It's not possible. It's not possible for everyone to be progressing as they need to be, becoming brilliantly them, with one teacher trying to make it work for every one of 30 kids. And that's where, again, I think the tech potentially becomes really interesting. It also becomes really interesting if you stop thinking that you have to supervise children all the time. So we had as a school, we had what we called an iCollege, which our kids graduated to when they showed us they could manage their own learning. They could work independently. So they gained more independence by showing us that they were able to be responsible for their independent time. And God forbid, sometimes they worked with a teacher, even during lesson time. And the really interesting thing is, no one died and everyone made progress, because you can trust people. People are not inherently bad. You know, they might not work when you want them to, but they get the work done if you start putting trust into them as well, I think. So I think we have to sort of break some of those paradigms, though, around, you know, you have to be quiet in class. And you do have to be quiet in class in the way that we're doing education at the moment, because the teacher has to be able to talk to everyone. But that's only because we're doing it like that. If we broke that apart, it probably wouldn't need to be like that anymore. I often wonder what would happen if we grouped kids according to how much they like to talk. Like at school, if I hadn't left, I might have done some setting where I put like all the introverts in a class together and all of the extroverts and then the omniverts in the middle. And we just kind of had some really noisy learning and some really quiet learning and some sort of ambivalent in the middle. Because I wonder whether that actually has more of an impact. If you like quiet, having quiet is probably quite important. If you're a talker, you need talking to keep you motivated, don't you? So it's a really interesting, just like playing with some of those ideas, I think would be really interesting.
It would. And also then even think about educators in that space. So there are some absolutely brilliant educators of the quiet thinkers who will just, here we go, and create spaces for that. And then there are people like my teaching style who just wants to have a conversation with people and wants to actually, I can draw things out of people, and that's how it used to work. I love that, and I love the idea that we could rethink some of these things that we have done before. That disposition, I'm going to come back to that phrase, dispositions, that you've used before, that disposition of wonder, that disposition of gregariousness, those kind of what type of person we are and how we believe about things that we value, our positioning in certain things is super powerful, because you talked about that knowledge, skills and dispositions early on. And I think from an educational philosophy and some of the other things that we've talked about today, I wonder if we could, when we've agreed our values and maybe committed them to paper, and we've thought about that idea of how we can then build systems using technology that can help do that. What do you mean by dispositions, and how can we develop dispositions in young people?
So the disposition word comes from Guy Claxton. So it's out there, isn't it? But Guy Claxton wrote a great book called The Future of Teaching. You might have come across it. And in there he has the learning river, which has basically got 3 levels. And he talks about the top level being knowledge. And knowledge is, you know, when you go fishing, I don't go fishing, so I'm about to go out of my comfort zone completely, but you'll go with me. So at the top level, if you've got fish swimming at the top, that's your knowledge transfer. They're really easy to catch. They're usually the smaller fish, you know, fairly easy to do. The middle level of the river is skills. It's a bit harder to develop skills than it is to pass knowledge. You have to practice them. They're much more sort of integral. They become part of you in a way that knowledge just doesn't. And then at the bottom, he talks about the big fish are the dispositions, the things we believe about ourselves, the things that we are. And he talks about our education system in the direct instruction model, the knowledge-rich model, only really dealing with the surface of the river. So doing the easy bit. And then, but what he says as well is that if you only pay attention to the top, the skills and the dispositions are developing, whether you like it or not. But because you're not paying attention to them, they're going to be developing sometimes in a negative way. So kids are picking up views of themselves that are just not true. So some really common ones for me would be, people like me don't do maths. You know, you go home, your parents don't get on with maths either. They talk to you about, oh, you know, our family find maths hard. So you go along with developing this disposition that maths is not for you. Might not be true. You know, like everyone can do maths if they've got long enough, the right support, they're interested enough. And I think the interest is a really interesting component. Like if you don't care about something, it's unlikely you're going to pick it up. But we behave like that doesn't matter. So the dispositions for me are the things we believe about ourselves, the sort of fundamentals of who we are. And I think Guy's Learning River for me is really helpful because it shows that they're developing whether you're paying attention to them or not. And so I wouldn't want to be presiding over an education system where kids are picking up dispositions that are negative about themselves. So they're being told, like Steve, you know, you talk too much. Okay, so you're picking up a disposition of it's not great to talk in lesson, or you ask too many questions. Okay, people like me shouldn't ask questions. It's bad to ask questions. All sorts of things. My mum, for me, my wonderful, powerful woman of a mother, just be quiet and comply and everything will be fine. People like me have to comply. You know, there's all of these things that we tell ourselves that come from our dispositions, and I think they're too important to leave to chance. I think our education system should be majoring on how, like, what are we telling ourselves about? What are we saying to ourselves about the way that we are, and how are we making sure that society then, because we educate for society, don't we? We don't educate just for the sake of it. We educate so that people can take their place in society. And I look at what's going on at the moment with the kind of riots that have been happening. I think what's gone wrong there, that people think that that's the only way to have their voice heard. And, you know, growing up in the Northeast, a lot of my family probably would feel like it would be okay to go out and protest like that. They wouldn't be doing all of the breaking and entering, although maybe some of them would, unfortunately. But I look at them and I think no one listens to what you think. You don't feel like you've got a voice. You've not had a voice since you were at school. You know, school has told you were a failure. You've come all the way through and everyone's told you that your culture isn't really worth anything. And I just think if we're going to stop all of that, we've got to start having conversations, not just about the best that's been thought or known or all of that knowledge stuff, but about like me and what I think and what I am and how I fit with the greater whole, and how you knock the edges off me as well so that I don't do harm to other people. So I think it's too big to leave it to chance. I'm now on my high horse again, aren't I? Ranting about dispositions. I just think we're focusing on the simple stuff and not really dealing with the really complex stuff, as you said, Stephen, that's under the surface, that is actually what our education should be about. I'll be quiet. Stunned you into silence.
No, I think, and we had the real David Cameron on a couple of weeks ago. He talked about some of the stuff that resonates into this, some of the stuff that we've been, you know, that is rising to the surface in terms of a lot of our conversations. You know, those natural bits where we go, oh, that's definitely been mentioned a couple of times, and it links into this conversation. And I think it goes back to that whole thing of education being led by accountants, in terms of our language that we use, in terms of outstanding outcomes and this and everything else. And it's like, is it a quarterly review? Is it, not sure how we're judging people as that, but also that whole thing of when people go in and ministers go in and say, I want some more money, or I want to be able to do something, they have to, unless I'm completely naive, I think this is the way it goes. They go in and they go to the Treasury, I want this budget, or I want to spend this. But the competing element is that the question back will be is, what will you do for it? What will you demonstrate? And what will you show for it? And the challenge in our current funding opportunity for education and public sector and many different things is, okay, how many more doctors and nurses will you have? How many more hospital beds will you have? How many more teachers will you have? How will that impact results? And we'll say, because you're competing against people who say, give me this money and I'll build more roads. Give me this and I'll protect our borders. Give me this and everything else. And you're competing in that narrative, which means that our narrative in education and those public sectors is around focusing on those things rather than it is very difficult to identify success and growth in education around the holistic learner based on how we judge it now. I think it would be challenging as a whole, but isn't that just the amazing thing? You know, we judge it on PISA, don't we? And all of those results in terms of outcomes and how we do it. And I remember a great conversation, and I won't say with who, and I said, I love the Finnish model. And then somebody went, yeah, but they're not doing as well recently either, so it's not really a model that you should probably. And I said, all right. I said, what they're not doing so well? Well, the exam results have dipped. And said, is that how we're judging their success of education, or is that how they judge themselves? Because the problem is, if you're judging it based on just exam results, well, I don't know. I don't look at that. But ultimately, what they develop and they focus on in regards to that nurturing of the holistic individual and everything else that goes with it is probably what they've been focusing on and why it was successful, not the way that we judge success in education. So I think we need to change that narrative as well. We've got a new government in, one that me and Ben have talked about, and we probably, without getting too political, have been excited for potential change, whether that comes based on some of the new language that's coming out.
Just change in general. We weren't looking for one kind of change.
But one thing that we do talk about, and one thing I say is, okay, but why is it a political thing? Ultimately, education needs to be taken out of the hands of any political party and needs to be focused on a long-term change and vision for the better, because it means then it's not chopping and changing. It's not focused on, well, you've got this money. You say this is how much as a minimum, and let's try and put more money into in terms of investment to get to where we want to be. And you take it out of people's opinions and bias, and you say, right, across party, you will then have some influencers that are beyond just those political people that probably haven't been in the same education systems that we have, and look at it all up. How many of those people have ever looked at holistic education? How many of those people have ever looked at online learning? How many of those people, and not online learning for COVID, where you're delivering and sitting, so people go, I'm exhausted, I've delivered a lesson online, it's so much more tiring being on meet delivering. And I'm like, you know that you don't have to do that, you can set them tasks. Well, how would Dad know that you get completed? And this is the thing in terms of leadership as well. Like, how do I know if they're going to do the work if I don't track their hours and everything else? And it's all of this thing where we need to start to change those milestones and those expectations and what we want to aspire to and what we want to achieve. And all of those small habits, the things that we focus on, those small marginal gains will make a massive difference in education. It's not just one thing of get rid of this is what it will change everything. Let's change loads of different things that we believe in. And you know what the worst case scenario is? We get it wrong. But haven't we been getting it wrong since when I was at school and well beyond that? Do you know, are we taking a risk, or have we been doing things wrong for a long period of time anyway and taking a greater risk by not changing it?
I trapped my arm in my chair. That's all it were. That's why
I thought you were going to jump in. I thought, oh wow, Ben's inspired by what I say. And he just trapped his arm, everybody. But Shonogh, just come in there.
No, it's really interesting. I think it hasn't really been working for a very long time. I left school with A levels in 1992 as a successful person. So I'm a success of the system. But I'm scared of, well, when I left school, I was scared of everything. I didn't know how to have a conversation with anyone. I was really academic. No one had ever told me there was more to life than just that. So even then, I don't think it was really working. I just go back to the political point though as well a little bit. Like, I'm probably one of the few people in education who's going, I'm just a little bit scared that we've had a change and everyone is now waiting for the change to come from government. And actually, I think that would be a really bad thing, to just sit back and wait. So I'm really pleased that we've had a change of government in some respects, but I'm also a bit anxious that what's going to happen is everyone's going to go, phew. Now we're in a situation where they'll start doing things that we like. And I just think that is exactly the same issue we've just had. It's some people liked what we used to have. Some people like what we've now got. I think actually the answer for me is we all need to not be waiting for politicians to tell us what to do. In my view, we need a situation where the conditions are created for the profession to be able to make decisions about what they do, rather than waiting to be told. And I think post-COVID, we've seen so much more of the waiting to be told what to do. It was like in COVID, something happened that allowed leaders or started leaders believing that other people knew better than them. I remember sitting in the Somerset Heads group and people would be like, the government haven't sent out the information about what we should do about blah. And I'd be like, right, okay, well, we just thought about it. And we've decided we're going to do this. Well, what if that's not what they want? Well, then we'll have done something different. Do you know, it bothers me that we're just doing this thing again of waiting for someone to tell us who knows more. And in this situation, they don't know more. The educators are the people who know more. Why don't we just crack on and make some decisions? And then, like, if it's wrong, okay, well, we'll just have to, like, apologise, rather than, like, assuming that this manna from heaven is going to come down and it's all going to be perfect and that's what we should be waiting for. I just don't think that's ever going to get us anywhere other than swinging between different opinions. Like, I think we just need some space, some enabling conditions, like I say, some principles that the government lay down of how educated people should be, and then let educators get on with it, with making that happen in whatever way it takes. And I agree with you, take out the Ofsted descriptors and the judgments of this is how it is to be successful. Start judging schools on where they say they're trying to be. We did a lovely piece of work with Philip Accordingly and Curie on a piece of work called Scale Momentum, which is an evaluation of a school based on what the school says about itself. So the school describes what it's trying to do through its policies and its vision, and you test whether what it says it's doing is what it actually is doing. So it's entirely about what the school is trying to achieve, rather than, well, this is what we're telling you should be trying to achieve, and matching it up against it. Like, I didn't ever want to achieve an outstanding on Ofsted because I don't buy Ofsted. I don't buy the standards that they are perpetuating. I didn't want a school like that. So you telling me we're not outstanding would be like, excellent. I wasn't trying to be. Do you know? I think there's just something in that. Like, let's hold them to account for what they say they're trying to achieve with the kids and the community that they've got, rather than this kind of across the bar model. When you read The End of Average, that's what Todd Rose talks about in that, you know, we've got this idea that if you get above the bar, but the bar is not even a thing. It's arbitrary.
Yep.
Someone decided in a fairly arbitrary way where the bar was, and we're all really exercised about getting across it. What if we actually started from what we said we were trying to achieve and move forward from there?
I saw a very funny meme about that, actually, about more than half of people are stupid than average.
Yeah.
The irony. Do you know what I mean? Like the whole craziness is.
Yeah.
But before we get into our quick fire questions, because we always finish our podcast with a quick fire questions, I just wanted to showcase this. This stays with me. Every conversation I'm having, I'm thinking this, because at the whole education conference that I was at this year, you gave everybody these badges. It says, if not us, who? And I absolutely love that it's not about, it's their fault, they need to do it, government do this, CEOs do this, CFOs do this, edtech companies do this, Ofsted do this. It's like, well, if not us, who? So it's that level of autonomy, that level of responsibility and accountability. And I love that. And I love that actually you started the conference talking about, we're all very excited that there's a change of government, but only if then that allows us to go like you've just talked about there. So I think the question and the conversation is about, if not us, who, and what that means is important for everybody who's listening. And those people who are just listening, I just showed a badge that were given out to all the people who went to that conference. If not us, who? It just feels like that's the question we need to keep asking. We've got to do something. What does it look like? And it's got to start. It's got to start with us.
Totally. And do you know, if everyone did that, the point we were trying to make was, if every teacher, every teaching assistant, every receptionist, every caretaker, every parent, every child thought like that, like, okay, instead of blaming someone else, instead of, you know, what are you going to do about it? If they thought, what could I do here? What could I change here now? Then it gets, well, that's how change happens, isn't it? David Price, who we all love, talked about, the way change is going to come it's going to come from the bottom. It's not going to come from policy. It's going to come from every person deciding to do the if not. It's actually the phrase is if not me who. I changed it to if not us, because I think the collective is so much more powerful than one person trying. But it starts with the one person, and then the collective action is where you get the momentum, I guess. So for us as an organisation, that is now something that we're asking all the time. We're going to send those badges to every single member in every school in our network. And we want people to be thinking in their classrooms every day, if not us, who? I'm going to be the change I want to see. I'm going to be, and it's why I'm asking, should we be thinking about, writing down or doing something about what we stand for? Because those things are so important in deciding the choice you make. And we're always faced with those. I could do it this way. I could do it this way. If you had taken that mantra that we've come up with, it's in those small micro decisions, choosing to do the thing that goes with what you believe is right, rather than assuming you don't have a choice. Because that's where stress comes from, isn't it? When you feel like you have no choice, when you feel like you're a victim of someone else's choosing, that's when you get really stressed and you feel disempowered and like you've got no hope. Hope comes from feeling like you can make even small choices. So you might not be able to do this thing, but you can do that. And that's what we were trying to sort of lean into with that mantra of, like, everyone has choice. You might not like the outcome of the choice that you have, but don't pretend you don't have a choice. You always do. And where you can, make the choice for the good, rather than just assuming you have to do as you're told.
Okay. Quick 5 questions, and this first question will resonate with what you've just said. If you could change one thing about education overnight, what would it be?
So I would have, it's a big one. I would change the need to tell everyone what to do to a set of principles by which people are guided, rather than a sort of set of things that you have to tick off.
Love it. What's the most exciting educational trend you see emerging?
Oh, goodness me. Educational trend that I see emerging. But you know what? It's probably when people come together in networks like ours and start talking and thinking together. It's not a big showy thing. It's just good people getting together to talk and share ideas. And yeah, networks springing up like yours all over, people finding their tribe and connecting. That's probably my biggest thing.
Final question.
Gives me hope.
Who is your biggest inspiration in education?
In education. It's really hard because there are so many. I think in the past, one of my biggest influences has been John West Burnham. Looking back, he was probably the person who had the biggest impact on who I am as a leader.
Love it. Love it. Well, this is one of those conversations that we didn't even get through half of the things that we said we were going to get through. And I know that obviously there's ongoing conversations about how we champion at EduFutures, how we champion the work that Whole Education are doing. And I know that you've been champions of what we do as well, and been involved with Uprising and all the other things that go with that. But we see what you're doing. I think I said to you, and I know you've used this before, you've said it back to me. First time I walked into a Whole Education event, I was speaking at that event, I opened my conversation with, do you know when you just find your people and you know that they're your people? It was like, this is a tribe of people who cared about young people, cared about schools, cared about educators, cared about society, and thought that it was more than just a transactional thing. It needed to be more than that. And I still wholeheartedly believe that. And I'm very, very excited for seeing how what you're doing grows. And thank you so much, Shonogh, for joining us on the podcast today. And hopefully it's the start of many conversations going forward.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks ever so much for letting me have my moment to talk about what I believe.
Perfect, thank you. And for those of you who haven't signed up already, Uprising 2025 tickets are available. You can get the link in the show notes. Thanks, everybody. That's another one done, Steve.